The beacon had been pulsing for 11 hours before the relay station relayed it to the ranger post, because the relay station was staffed by a Veleth Compact clerk who had assumed the signal was instrument drift. 11 hours in which the temperature on the Veleth shelf had dropped from -48 degrees C to -61 degrees C. 11 hours during which the wind had built from a manageable 30 kilometers per hour to something that scraped along the ice like a file across metal. Taya Voss had been eating a ration pack when the transfer came through. She set it down, pulled up the coordinates on the post's display, and calculated the crossing distance at 42 kilometers. The duty roster showed one skimmer available. The skimmer's engine block had been cracked in last week's gale. She pulled on her thermal underlayer, her insulated suit, her outer shell, and her boots, checked the clasps in order from ankle to chest the way the training had taught her, and went out. She was 22 years old. She had been posted to Veleth for 7 months. She had crossed the shelf in worse than this. The Veleth Compact operated 16 survey teams on the shelf. Their surveyors were Tharesi, bronze-gray scaled, four-limbed, evolved on a Class 6 world where the warmest recorded temperature had been a comfortable 12 degrees. They wore compound thermal suits rated for -40 degrees C and carried emergency heating cores. They were experienced cold world workers. None of that mattered at degrees C with a gale building from the northwest. Taya had read the casualty reports from Veleth's previous 3 survey seasons. She knew what cold did to Tharesi at the edge of their thermal range. It started with fine motor failure. They couldn't operate the heating core controls anymore. And then the shivering stopped, which was the point where most humans would assume recovery was beginning, and most Tharesi would not be breathing within the hour. She was thinking about this as she walked, because thinking about it helped her move faster. The beacon was in the Kethvareth sub-basin, a shallow depression 30 kilometers south of the post where the ice shelf dipped slightly and then rose again in a series of pressure ridges. Survey teams used it as a navigational checkpoint. It was exposed on 3 sides to the northwest wind. Nobody camped there voluntarily. She found the first body at kilometer 29. It was a Tharesi male, face down in the snow 20 meters off the marked survey trail, half buried by drift. His outer suit was intact. His emergency beacon had been manually disabled. She could see the panel on his forearm casing had been opened and the transmitter relay physically disconnected. He was dead. The cold had been sufficient cause, but the cold was not what had killed him. There was a wound on the back of his head, under the suit collar, that matched the diameter of a compact tissue survey stake. A hardened alloy rod about 60 centimeters long, used to mark subsurface cores. Taya photographed the wound from 3 angles and kept walking. The beacon was coming from another 200 meters south. She found the second surveyor in a hollow beneath an ice ridge, curled into the smallest shape possible, still alive. Barely. His thermal suit's heating core was at 4% charge. His registration tag identified him as Orathen of Survey Cohort 7. He was young, the Tharesi aged differently, but the smoothness of his scale plates and the unblemished frill along his neck ridge told her he was probably not more than 4 or 5 years out of training. He could not speak. His limbs were rigid. She checked his heating core, saw 4%, swapped it out for the spare on her belt, and waited 40 seconds for the warmth to begin moving through the suit lining. Then she wrapped the emergency thermal blanket around both of them and hunkered down against the ice. "You're going to be okay," she said. She said it in Tharesi, which she had spent 3 of her 7 months on Veleth learning, because the survey teams appreciated it, and because it was better to communicate clearly in a crisis than to perform. Orathen's eyes moved. He knew she was there. "The other one," he said, it came out broken and slow. "Sethvar, he's." "I found him," she said. "Can you tell me what happened?" The story came out in pieces over the next 20 minutes, while the heating core brought Orathen's core temperature up to the point where his hands could move again. Taya recorded every word. Survey Cohort 7 had been running a standard subsurface core assessment on the Keth-Varath floor, mapping mineral density gradients. What they had found was not standard. There was a VAR-9 thermal seam running at 80 meters depth, continuous across 16 square kilometers of shelf. A geothermal deposit of a kind that had not been recorded anywhere else on Velkethavar, and that carried commercial implications worth discussing with someone considerably more senior than a survey team leader. Sethvar had logged the discovery and filed the preliminary report up the chain. Cohort 7's chain of command ran through a Veleth Compact regional director named Kresavar, slate purple, broad-shouldered, the kind of Veleth official who had been managing survey operations on Velkethavar for 11 years, and who had a private arrangement with a secondary extraction consortium that did not want any new claimable thermal seams appearing in the official geological registry before certain licensing agreements expired in 4 months. Kresavar had arrived at the survey camp 2 days ago in a personal skimmer. He had met with Sethvar and Orathen. He had been very pleasant. He had explained that the preliminary report contained classification errors and needed to be refiled under a different geological category, one that would route it to a subsidiary registry where it would sit, unprocessed, for approximately 18 months. Sethvar had refused. He had been a senior surveyor for 12 years. He had filed accurate reports his entire career. He was not going to misfile a VAR-9 seam because a regional director had told him to. Kresavar had left. The next day someone had come back. Orathen had been 300 meters out from camp, running a depth probe when he heard the sound. By the time he got back, Sethvar was already dead. The stake was gone. The camp's communication array had been manually disconnected. There was a skimmer print in the snow, already beginning to fill in the wind. Orathen had done the only thing he could do. He had taken the survey data storage unit from the camp's backup module, tucked it inside his innermost thermal layer, activated his emergency beacon, and gone to ground in the hollow under the ice ridge, where the wind was slightly less, and where anyone looking from a distance would not immediately see him. He had been there for 11 hours. "I have the data," he said. He moved one hand, slow and deliberate, and tapped the center of his chest. "It's here." "Good," Taya said. "Keep it there." Getting Orathen back to the ranger post was a 4-hour exercise in applied stubbornness. He could walk barely, leaning against her with one hand gripping her outer shell. The wind was at its worst in the open sections between the pressure ridges, and in those sections Taya took the weight, braced into the gale, and counted paces. There was no particular technique to it. You moved, and then you moved again, and you did not stop moving. She had not yet radioed ahead. She thought about that as she walked. The beacon alert had gone through the relay station. The relay station was a compact facility. She did not know who staffed it tonight, or who they reported to, or how quickly word moved in Kresavar's network. She had a ranger post radio that broadcast on the emergency survey frequency. She also had a direct hardline to the Velkethavar Settlement Authority office in Veth Station, 45 minutes away by skimmer. The Settlement Authority was not a compact body. She keyed the hardline at kilometer 15 of the return crossing and gave the Settlement Authority duty officer a precise, unembellished account. 1 surveyor dead, wound pattern inconsistent with accidental death, 1 survivor with geological survey data, crossing in progress, estimated arrival 4 hours. She named Kresavar. She gave the coordinates where she had photographed the body. She gave the survey stake dimensions and the wound diameter measurements she had taken. The duty officer was a Korathi, gray-plated, older, slightly bureaucratic. There was a pause after she finished speaking that lasted about 3 seconds. "Ranger Voss," he said, "are you asking us to?" "I'm telling you what I found," she said. "What you do with it is your decision. I'm going to keep walking now. She clipped the handset and kept walking. The Keth-Vareth pressure ridges were the hardest section. There were 6 of them, spaced irregularly, each one requiring them to climb a slope of angled ice at an angle that made the wind hit from slightly different vectors. Orathen fell on the 3rd one. She caught him, held him against the slope, waited for a wind lull that lasted 8 seconds, and moved them both over the crest in those 8 seconds. On the 4th ridge, he spoke without being asked. Sethvar would have filed the report eventually, he said. Whatever they did to the preliminary, he would have found a way. I know, Taya said. He had filed correct reports for 12 years. I know. The SEAM data will be accurate. The survey unit stores in protected segments. They can't be deleted without a settlement authority override key. She looked at him. His scale plates were pale from cold, but his eyes were steady. He had been thinking about this for 11 hours under the ice. You know your equipment, she said. I was going to be a data archivist, he said. Before I transferred to field survey, I know where everything is stored. Good, she said again. Tell me all of it. Everything you know about the data unit, the way the reports get filed, the chain of command above Kresevar. He talked, she listened. They crossed the last 2 ridges. They reached the ranger post at the 4th hour mark, 11 minutes ahead of her estimate. There was a settlement authority skimmer already parked outside, 2 officers, Korathi, in heavy thermal gear. There was also a second skimmer she didn't recognize, smaller, with compact registry marks. Taya walked past the compact skimmer without stopping. Inside, she settled Orathen in the thermal recovery bay, confirmed his core temperature on the monitor, and told the first settlement authority officer everything a second time, in the same order, with the same precision. She gave them the photographic record from her suit camera. She gave them her handset log with the timestamp of her initial report. She gave them the coordinates and wind conditions, an estimated drift fill rate of the tracks she had observed around Sethvar's body, so they could estimate the timing of the skimmer's approach and departure. The second settlement authority officer had taken Kresevar into custody 20 minutes before she arrived. He had been at the compact relay station, which was 7 kilometers from the ranger post, giving instructions to the clerk who had delayed the beacon relay for 11 hours. This information was delivered to Taya by the first officer in a tone that carried something between surprise and something that was not quite awe, but was in that general direction. You called us before you had confirmation he was there, the officer said. I didn't need confirmation, Taya said. I needed someone who could hold him if he was. You were certain he'd acted. I was certain someone had. He was the one who'd met with Sethvar 2 days before. He was the one who had reason to. She looked at the officer. The wound pattern wasn't ambiguous. Cold doesn't leave a wound like that. Orathen was in the thermal bay, conscious, running at a stable core temperature. He had the survey data unit in his hands. He would not put it down until a settlement authority evidence recorder took custody of it, which he seemed to understand was the appropriate next step, and toward which he was quietly cooperating. The compact relay clerk was in the second room, also in custody, insisting loudly that he had simply classified the beacon as instrument drift based on standard signal criteria. Nobody in the room appeared to find this convincing. Taya wrote her incident report at the ranger post desk at 3 in the morning, with a heated ration pack going cold at her elbow. The report was 12 sections. She wrote each section in the order the training had specified. Scene findings first, survivor status second, evidence collected third, communications log fourth. The last section was summary and assessment. She wrote, Wound pattern on survey cohort 7 member Sethvar is inconsistent with environmental exposure fatality. Wound diameter and position are consistent with impact from a survey stake applied from behind. Timing of beacon relay delay, presence of compact director Kresevar at relay station, and prior meeting with victim establish reasonable basis for investigation. Survivor Orathen of Survey Cohort 7 is in stable condition. Survey Data Unit containing VAR 9 SEAM assessment is in Settlement Authority Evidence Custody. Geological record is intact. She submitted the report at 03:14. She finished the ration pack. It was cold by then, but she ate it anyway, because she had 42 kilometers in her legs, and she had not eaten since the one she had set down at the post when the beacon transfer came through. Outside, the wind had dropped to 12 kilometers per hour. Velkethavar's temperature had risen to -54 degrees C, which was not warm but was 7 degrees less cold than it had been when she found Orathen in the hollow under the ice ridge. She noted that in the final line of her report and filed it. In the thermal bay, Orathen had fallen asleep with the survey data unit held to his chest, both hands around it, the way you hold something that costs someone else everything and that you are not going to let go of. The recovery monitor showed his core temperature steady at 31 degrees and rising. The Korathi Settlement Authority officer had draped a second thermal blanket across him without being asked. Taya turned off the desk lamp and let him sleep.